All right. Morning, guys. So unfortunately, we only seem to have 3 people in so far, but we do have some people that are already waiting for the start of the lecture online. So we are going to have to start so that we don't disadvantage those that are here already. But before we start, we're just going to say a word of prayer so that we can get into the day perfectly. All right. You can take a seat. All right. So we're just going to say a word of prayer before we start. Father, in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord, we come before you this morning with gratitude in our hearts, O Lord, for protecting us during the night. And I would like to thank you, Lord, for the time that you have given us today, this morning, for us to be able to come and learn about your word in a way that you have ordained. I ask you, Lord, to open our hearts and minds to receive new information and be able to take it forward. Help us to understand, O Lord, and be able to apply in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. All right. Last week, we introduced study skills and maybe just 1 or 2 things concerning that initial lecture that we had. We managed to establish that studying is indeed a skill, and in it being a skill, it is something that we can actually learn. It is something that we can acquire, and it is something that we can perfect through practice. So this week, true to fashion, we are going to be looking at the library and plagiarism. And what we are going to do, this is literally a continuation from where we started off last week. All right. So, in terms of talking about library and plagiarism, it's quite easy for us to go into it already and just say, what exactly? Oh, you don't have a copy. All right. All right. Let me just signal. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's this is only lecture 1. Okay. All right. But you always see the raw guide in myself. No, not yet. Not yet. All right. So let me also share the raw guide with the student that I have here. I'm going to share it on the chat. There it is. Open. All right, so for our student who's online, I've shared the raw guide with you as well here. so that you will also be able to follow. All right. So I'm going to continue while we receive the copies of the road guide. All right. So as I was saying, it's quite easy for us to talk about the library and plagiarism, but I think what is more important is understanding how a conversation about the library and plagiarism constitute the kind of knowledge we need towards our study skills. So given the fact that we had said study skills are the skills that we need in order for us to be effective in studying, we are now sort of unpacking what studying is. So last week we said in terms of studying, there are two dimensions. There is the environment, which is where we are studying, and there are also personal attributes, which is us. So what exactly are our own characteristics? What are our personality traits like regarding studying? What are our attitudes towards studying? So now we are saying study, we are putting it back on the pedestal and we are slicing it open and we are looking at the other elements associated with study. So firstly, when we talk about studying, the first thing that almost comes to our minds is reading something. All right. So that's what we're going to go with. So reading something, where do we get the materials? We get them from the library predominantly, even though that's not exclusively where we can get our material. But in a conversation that has to do with the library, there's also a conversation about plagiarism. So to talk about plagiarism, in fact, before I go on to the next slide, that is in essence giving us a breakdown of what plagiarism is, I just want to find out from you guys if you've ever heard of the word plagiarism, if you know what it is, or at least what do you know about plagiarism? Anything that just comes to your mind when we talk about plagiarism? Yes.
So something satisfying.
Something?
Something that you're satisfied with.
All right, something that you're satisfied with. Okay. All right, yes.
Maybe one way is to use someone's work, maybe in your essay, that you do not acknowledge as a source, so that you make it your own work.
All right. Interesting. So taking someone else's work and not acknowledging. All right. Interesting. Anybody else? When we talk about plagiarism, what else comes to mind? For some of us, it might be the first time we're encountering this word, and it's not a problem at all. So when we talk about plagiarism, we are in essence talking about misrepresenting information. Now, why did I opt to define it, or at least to talk about it as a misrepresentation of information? Precisely because there are multiple elements of plagiarism, most of which go beyond just taking someone else's work. Because taking someone else's work has a connotation of intent, like you intended to do this. But there are also instances where you plagiarize, but without intending to plagiarize. Now, what we mean is, not all of us go out of their way to say, I am going to copy this person's work. But more often than not, it is literally the inability to reference properly. So that's why I said it's a misrepresentation. So when we talk about misrepresentation, we're saying you have written down something, but you are not necessarily presenting that work effectively or attributing it effectively to another person. For instance, may I use, right, Global Study Bible, right? So this here is a Global Study Bible, and there is information that is in here. This information was written by someone. So whenever we use that information that has been written by someone, we need to acknowledge the person that wrote it. Now, the reason why we need to acknowledge the person that wrote this information is because there is a particular way we are supposed to relate to information. And that is to say, the work that is written by someone is said to be that particular person's intellectual property. What does this mean? What this means is anything that you write down that is original content from you is your property, because it is the product of your brains. And because it is the product of your brains, it therefore belongs to you. Now, the process of coming up with original ideas is something that is so, I don't want to say difficult, but it is a process that you go through. It's almost like you built a house and someone just comes and claims it as their own. So to write something, to put something together, to put something on paper, the books that we are reading, the guys that do that, they are investing some form of capital, intellectual capital. So they are using their brains, they are using their minds to put this information on paper. And therefore, to take it or to use it without acknowledging the original author of that information is considered, this is where it gets interesting. On the one hand, especially if you look at the Mkanyo policy, it says it is unbiblical. And in it being unbiblical, the implication is it's unethical, it's immoral, but in proper academic speak, it constitutes a crime. So to take someone's information or to use someone's information and not reference the person that wrote that information, it is considered stealing. So you are stealing ideas. But how can ideas be stolen if we say ideas are these things that exist in our mind? It's precisely because we understand that ideas are property. So they become intellectual property. So the same way that this is my computer, this is my phone, that is my bed, these are my books, they are my property, my ideas are my intellectual property. And whoever wants to use them needs to acknowledge that they are not the original authors of this idea. All right. And so what that means is that in any instance where you are using up another individual's ideas, you need to represent or to present those ideas in such a way that we know you are borrowing, not outrightly stealing So when we talk about, or when I was talking to you guys 2 weeks ago about how study skills is a way of learning a new academic language, what that implies is learning about principles of intellectual property. And so we are now going to be looking at in what ways can someone misrepresent information as being their own when it actually belongs to someone else. All right, so I clearly see my fault here because this is difficult to see, but not a problem. I am going to read it out for you guys. But this information is actually also in the raw guide, but I'm also going to give you my slides after the class. They will be sent to you so that you have them and you can use them as well. So when we talk about plagiarism, that first slide, this one here, is talking about presenting another person's ideas as if they are your own, either directly or indirectly. So what we mean here is you heard Walter say something last week, and now in your own conversation, you take those ideas, maybe because they sounded smart or, and then you say them out as if you are the one who has just thought of them. Now, this tends to happen in assignments, because when we ask you to write an assignment, you are responding to the question. And by responding to that question, you are going to have to go to the library, open some books, this, that, and the other. And when you are now putting the information onto the page, you are typing out your assignment, you now take someone else's ideas and present them as if you are the one who has thought of this. So that in itself constitutes a crime. So that is what we are saying is taking or presenting another person's ideas as if they're own. Now, the concept of either directly or indirectly, you can directly take these ideas, either copy and paste, or you can indirectly take these ideas in the sense that as you are talking about them, you might not have copied and pasted, maybe you have paraphrased, but you are not directly attributing who wrote these ideas. So taking them in that way, either copy and paste or a failure to reference the individual that initially wrote them, that is plagiarism. The second thing there is saying copying or pasting texts and images without saying where they are from. And I have examples of this, and we are going to look at it. So ideas that are being stolen are not just texts. So it's not just the written information in a book, but it can even be a picture that someone took. And because right now, these days, we just take a screenshot and we start distributing. So all of that is academic fraud right there. Then neglecting to indicate when a quote is a quote, using quotation marks and citations. Now, the idea behind quotations is if you take information directly as it is. We are not saying it is not allowed. You can do it. In fact, at this stage, we actually encourage, but there is a way that it needs to be done. So for example, may I borrow, in fact, I shouldn't even have come because this is the Bible. So this is a very famous verse. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. What verse is that? Exactly. Genesis 1, verse 1. Now, the issue is, we all know this verse. And if I take it and I'm talking to someone or writing in an assignment and I say, this is a very simple argument, literally because in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. If I put it that way, it's plagiarism, because I did not attribute where that information is coming from, because I am not the original author of that information. So the same applies to any textbook. You might find either a sentence or a phrase or maybe even a paragraph. You are allowed to, if that paragraph, phrase, or sentence speaks directly to what you are responding to in your assignment, you can take it directly as it is. But there is a way of then referencing that information so that we know where it is coming from. Most of these are the things that I'm going to start talking about. We are going to talk about them when we ultimately, I think it's in lecture 4, when we look at referencing, which is where we are looking at how then do you reference that material. But there are ways of referencing within the text as well as in your bibliography at the end of the assignment. Right now, these might just be words. Don't worry about it. We are going to get to all of these sections in an assignment in due course. But for now, I just wanted to say, when we are referencing this material, we reference it twice. We reference it first within the body of the essay, and then we reference it at the end of the essay. Later on, we will see how that is done. But the point I'm trying to make is, it is allowed for you to copy and paste, but you need to reference where you got that information. Because if you don't reference where you got that information, the software that we use to detect plagiarism will tell us where you got that information. So when you submit your assignments, we put them through a plagiarism checker that will help us to know. But in the case of more distinguished educators like Rev Lewis and Pastor Dumi, these are guys that are now familiar with most of the books that you're going to be using. So if you do copy and paste and you don't acknowledge, they can easily detect while they're reading. Yeah.
I know you helped me in this
Yeah.
since I've been a victim. So, if you are using so I'm due to write it again, but I still have the same questions that I expected. I still have the same reasons that I what's going to happen if I use the same answers that I used before?
All right.
But now the software might pick up my previous one.
Yes. So that firstly, that is what is known as self-plagiarism, which is a very funny concept, because what we are in essence saying is that you wrote or you generated your own property, intellectual property, when you wrote that assignment. Now, it is yours, but if you take it and submit it again. Either you have changed one or two things, because at least you now have, feedback on that particular assignment. If you tweak it and resubmit that, it is going to be caught as self-plagiarism. So it is not allowed. But there are also other instances in which it might not be considered self-plagiarism. And that is literally depending on the nature of the assignment. For example, if our assignment is a cumulative or the kind of assignment that is building on itself. So for instance, you are asked, assignment 1, provide us with a rough draft, right? You write out your rough draft and then you submit that. And then I, as the lecturer, I'm going to read and give you feedback and show you what you need to change, where you need to change, how you need to change certain elements. And I give you that feedback and you rework that and you submit the final thing. In that instance, that is one of the only instances where it is not considered self-plagiarism, because it is the nature of the assignment that requires you to submit the first draft and then submit the final draft. But now in terms of what do you do? So the idea is you need to produce a completely new assignment. Now, what I'm about to say might be considered in most circles as morally ambiguous. That's just a fancy way of saying we are now stepping into the gray area. Because you are students, I was also once a student and am also a student, we know it's not always possible. So I'm going to tell you or teach you how to do it so that you don't get flagged. So this is what you do. You look at what you have submitted already. But before you start working on it, go back to the feedback that you received. Try and understand what exactly it is they are saying you need to do. And then you need to build a complete set of ideas, though they are still based on what you have submitted, but you are almost paraphrasing. So you are now providing those same ideas, but they have been reworked in a different way. So that's the best way of working around that. But what I'm going to do for you guys is I'm going to, that is after class, I think later on this evening, I'm actually going to give you example assignments where these things that we are talking about exist, so that you'll be able to say, okay, so this person wrote like this the first time, and the second time they wrote like this, and they were caught for self-plagiarism, so that you understand what we are talking about. All right, so I will provide those assignments for you so that you can look at them and see what it is that we're.
In terms of the, because we know that we write assignments, yes, you will always reference, but sometimes you've got those ideas that you own them. But those ideas were ideas of someone, not necessarily to build from the book. You came up with them. But then the question then is, do you then have a score? I'm sure you should, because chances are they, as much as there is a new information, but there's no new information. You will always have information that was used before, and someone can easily accuse you of taking it from, instead of them knowing that you self-generated then obviously I think what you therefore want to be, is there a margin of error?
Yeah.
That you then allow to say, okay, fine, yes, it looks like, but we're okay with that. As long as you scope below, because ultimately, whatever idea that you generate, somehow they exist.
Very true. Right. And it is true. So generally, as a matter of principle, regardless of what institution you go to, whenever we use a plagiarism checker software, either Turnitin or Grammarly or whatever else that we use, the highest score that is always accepted is going to be 25%. So anything beyond 25%, we then have to investigate what exactly is the source of plagiarism. In fact, before I even go there, let me just take it a step back for those that might not understand what we are actually talking about. Let me just explain what plagiarism checker software is all about and what it does. So plagiarism software is software that looks at all of the texts that have been uploaded online, and it compares the assignment that you have written, it compares it against all of the other information that is found on the internet. But what do we mean by information that is on the internet? So we have books on the internet, all right? And we also have articles, we have websites and so on and so forth that are held on the internet. But surprisingly, we also have student assignments. So the moment we load or run your assignment through a plagiarism checker, it is now part of the information that is going to be used, which is the reason why when you submit again, it will be flagged as self-plagiarism, because the first time that we ran your assignment through plagiarism checker, it was recorded. So the second time you submit it, it is going to appear as plagiarized. So we will then call it self-plagiarism, because when it was initially run through the system and recorded, they record everything, including the name of the assignment, the year that you wrote the assignment, the subject or the course for that assignment, the author of the assignment, and if you had written your lecturer's name, the lecturer, and if you had written the school name itself is recorded. So it records everything. And when you submit again a similar thing, it is going to say it's self-plagiarism, because we are seeing that the first one that was uploaded has your name, and the second one that has been uploaded has your name. But for example, if you steal his assignment because he did the module last year and you're doing it now and you're best friends and he has given you and you submit it like that, that won't be considered self-plagiarism, because you are not the original author of that assignment. So when they upload your first assignment, and then someone else submits their own other assignment, what happens is, excuse me, this plagiarism software, what it does is it opens your assignments and it goes page to page, comparing, trying to see against a million other resources that are on the internet, trying to see where exactly you might have copied certain things. Now, the margin of error that he's talking about arises this way. You have written your assignment, but as we talk, right? I might not have been part of a conversation you were having yesterday, but you can actually begin to recognize, thank you so much. But you can recognize that there are similar phrases that I am using, but I was not part of your conversation, meaning that naturally, because we are people, we have encountered a lot of ideas already. So when we naturally talk, we tend to borrow unconsciously from other people. Therefore, what the plagiarism software does is it says there is such and such a percentage of similarity, not just between this assignment and that assignment, but between the assignment that you have submitted and all the information that exists on the internet. Which is the reason why we then use percentages, which is why I was saying the general rule of thumb is 25%, nothing beyond 25%. But just because you've exceeded 25% does not necessarily mean you get penalized immediately. We then need to investigate and figure out where that high percentage is coming from. Because most of our plagiarism softwares are still unable. So for example, you have referenced Genesis 1 verse 1. It's always going to tell you that you have copied. Because that is something that is very similar to everything else that has ever been written. Because imagine the number of students in all of the theological colleges across the world that have ever written down Genesis 1 verse 1. So when you write it, it's obviously going to flag that as similarity. So what we do is the moment your assignment goes beyond the 25% threshold, us as the lecturers, we have to investigate where that is coming from. And then we manually exclude certain things so that we can bring down that percentage to an acceptable level. So we also have to investigate, as the educators, as the lecturers, we investigate why your percentage is high. So this is how plagiarism software works. And this is where the margin of error is question is coming from. Yes.
Thank you for explaining. Then what about when you are representing an idea? As you say, it's in the intellectual. Let's say you are presenting something on YouTube or TV, and the more you acquire knowledge, some of it will begin to sound like the other person.
Mm-hmm.
How would you, what should you say? You are talking, you are in the meeting, they're screening you, and ideas are flowing. Can somebody really sue you for, to say, I heard you talking something, I think you took it from you? What happens? How do you protect yourself?
Right.
As a people?
So as a presenter, we need to understand that there are different classifications of information that we can present. And to say ideas, it is a very loose word that is not precise in its definition. Let me say it in English. To talk about similar ideas, we first of all need to understand the nature of the idea itself. So for instance, if I was to present a theory, right, as if I am the one that said it, and in a presentation, right, that is obviously wrong, because that theory is well known, and we all know where it probably came from, because there are multiple theories. We can talk about conflict theory, Marxist theory, we can talk about utilitarian theory, we can talk about objectivism, legalism, right? All of these are theoretical concepts. So this classification of ideas, where we are talking about or referring to theoretical knowledge, that one we need to reference, but, because there's always a but, you don't necessarily always have to reference that. And I'll explain the conditions under which you don't necessarily always have to. So, for instance, I could be talking about the family, and I say, you know, from a functionalist perspective, the family is seen as a haven, as a place of safety where individuals within that family can thrive. I can say it like that and not need to reference anything, and it's considered correct. But the moment I start saying, you know, when I came up with the functionalist theory, what I was saying is that becomes a completely different ballgame, precisely because I'm not the one who created the functionalist theory. So that is the one category of ideas. The other category of ideas is, say, for example, you are talking about Christ and culture, right? In terms of Christ and culture, we might know that, you know, we first of all need to understand that we are in the world, but not of the world. But you also have a certain understanding of that question. And that understanding might also be similar to another person's understanding who has said other things elsewhere, that side of the world. In such instances, we don't necessarily say you have necessarily plagiarized an idea, even though there are instances where this has occurred. So for instance, you're preaching, you're on the pulpit and you're talking about these things. We are talking about creation. We've all read about creation. We've all heard of other people talking about creation, but you have your own concept that you have been developing for some time. All right. Now, we always imagine that when it comes to especially issues of the Bible, most of the things that we are going to say have already been said. It's very difficult for us to come up with something inherently new and original that would shock anyone, unless maybe if we are saying that the devil is also going to go to heaven if he repents. But as absurd as that might sound, other people have already said it. Mm-hmm. So in that instance, it's not always a crime. However, the instances where people might follow it up is when you are now getting so much credit for saying something in a way that another person failed to say it. And now it seems as if you and your own presentation of that very idea is bringing about some form of monetary benefit or some form of popularity or fame. That's when some other people might say, but no, that person was not the first one to say it, but it's now only coming about because there is some form of benefit that you are getting from having said that idea. But by and large, when we are on the pulpit or when we are on the news or when we are giving interviews, it's not always going to be possible for us to reference everything, even though it is a very good practice for us to do so. Yes.
Okay, no, I just want to know if when we are in a class, we study as a
Mhm.
in that group, we come common answer, and then we use that same idea. Then can we use that answer to our assignments? That then if the government gets the answer the same information, put it on that can be taken also as a plagiarism.
Right. So there it becomes very interesting, and it also then depends on the position of your lecturer. Let me explain what I mean. So I'm going to give you guys an activity to do where you are going to read a portion of text, and you're going to have to paraphrase. You're going to do it on your own, and then you're going to discuss either in pairs or in threes and compare, how did you do it? How did you do it? How did you do it? Right? You're going to have a conversation. And at the end of the day, each and every group is going to have more or less a similar understanding of what was being spoken about in that portion of text. Now, if you were then asked to write an assignment based on that, your ideas are obviously going to be the same. But here's the thing. Having similar ideas does not necessarily translate to having identical ways of expressing that idea. So even if the three of you are in a group and you are discussing, because what a lot of people do, in not just in seminary, but in all studies everywhere, is people form study groups. And in those study groups, people come together and help each other with information. Guys, I don't quite understand this. What exactly are they trying to say? And as a group, you are now having a battle of ideas. I think they're trying to say this. The other one says, no, but I think they're trying to say that. And another person might say, but you see, the way they've used this word, I think this is what they're saying. And everybody's like, oh, okay. So now we can actually build that other idea. We can now see how it comes in, right? This is you discussing, Genesis 1 that you have to write. Now you are writing the assignment. I can easily tell which group members were in the same group or which individuals were in the same group, because I can see the similarity of your ideas. But the way that you are going to put them on a page is always going to be different. So same idea, but different presentation of the idea. So when it is in class like that, we don't call that plagiarism because you have a similar idea, literally because, in fact, the world over, when we are talking about Genesis 1, we are literally almost talking about the same thing. But what accounts for the differences is also the differences in people, because the way that you have understood it and the way you're going to put it on a page is completely different to the next person. It's still the same idea, but how it is put on paper is what is going to be different. But we also have this other scenario. So because I am the one who's teaching you guys, I'm giving you information. How do you use that information in an assignment? Do you have to reference me because I was the teacher that was teaching you that information? This is where I was saying it now also depends on who your lecturer is. Some lecturers say, I want you to reference me because these are my ideas. But for me and the generality of other lecturers, I might be generalizing a bit too much. But the idea is whatever we are teaching you constitutes the knowledge that you need to take up on your own. So you don't have to reference that. So you don't have to reference my speech as the lecturer. That you can take it and use it as if it is your own, precisely because what I want for you is for you to take that information, look at it critically, and understand that this is what it is supposed to be, or this is the implication of this information, and this is how it can relate to that and that other thing. So the process of learning is more than just copying and pasting what I am saying. You are actually building on the things you already know. So when I say whatever I say, the understanding is you don't just take that as it is and then you put it on a page, but you think about it, you digest it, you try to understand from your own perspective. So when you eventually give me that idea, it is not exclusively my idea that I taught you, but it is also collaboratively your own idea because you have also thought about other things in relation to it. So for instance, the thing that we said last week and the thing that I started talking about today is that we said study skills is something that you can acquire and something that you can practice and perfect. So that is information that I've given you. And when you are sitting there and thinking about it, you have a million different scenarios in your mind of what that might mean. And so when you are now writing about how studying is a skill, what you ultimately put on the page, you are not attributing to me because you've done your own thinking in that regard. Yes.
In terms of one of the things that we always encourage the students is when you read the passage or you read a book or perhaps you read information, you need to put it in such a manner that paraphrase. And when you then paraphrase, you then have to, because I know there are paraphrasing where you need to reference. But in an assignment where you read perhaps a book and therefore you need to put that information in accordance to how you understand that information. And assuming it is a page, not necessarily a paragraph. You can successfully paraphrase a paragraph and then reference. But now you're writing a page and you've read that body of information. Now you're applying it into your assignment. Now, in that case, how do you do it?
Right. So the way that you do it, because there are two things that you are doing concurrently as you are paraphrasing, right? Because more often than not, whenever you write any assignment, you are never asked to just paraphrase, right? I'll explain what I mean by that. But the idea is in any given assignment, paraphrasing forms part of what you need to be doing in that assignment. Now, to paraphrase, as we can see, to paraphrase is to rephrase or rewrite the author's words in your own words and own kind of language. So what we are essentially saying is that when you read anything, you first of all need to grasp what is being said, and then you put your ideas there. Now, within an assignment, paraphrasing forms part of what you have to do. The other part is analysis. So how do we put paraphrasing and analysis together to form that one page that you've been talking about? We essentially do it by doing two things. Firstly, you need to give us the idea that you're analyzing. So for instance, Walter said, or Walter states that study skills is something that you can acquire and something that you can perfect in time. You've paraphrased what Walter says. What are the implications? What exactly does that mean? So what it means is whenever you are now reading, you are actually practicing reading. Whenever you are taking down notes, you are practicing understanding. You are also practicing note-taking. Why? Because note-taking, paraphrasing, and understanding, all of these are components of the skill of study. So what I've done in that instance is to paraphrase an idea and then explain that idea in my own words. So whenever you are writing an assignment, that is what you are supposed to be doing. So paraphrasing will only then constitute half of what needs to be done. The other half has to be analysis.
Would that not be perhaps if you argue a certain point, what you're explaining, assuming you are asked about a certain point, and then you then need to support your argument. So based on that, then you can paraphrase and give analysis, because now you are trying to give perhaps more information of what you're trying to argue, whether the argument is successfully accepted or not. But in you having to argue a certain point of idea, will therefore that not work. But in a sense where it's an assignment where you just need to go and research information, or perhaps maybe the assignment that there's Mutani will therefore need to give us would be an assignment where we need to argue a certain position. Because if you do that, then I think that will not.
So that is a very splendid question, because it also then points us towards a very important thing, which is there are different types of assignments that you can be asked to write about. And I'm going to give you just a broad scope of these assignments, but at the same time, I'm going to be addressing his initial question, which is, how then do you paraphrase and do something else in that specific type of assignment? So the one that he has highlighted, which is what I was explaining, is we have what are known as argumentative essays. So in argumentative essays, you need to provide an argument, or at least you are debating a particular position. All right. So in such an instance, what I was saying, Walter said this, these are the implications, or do you agree or not with what has been said? There are evaluative assignments, one where you are evaluating a claim. But what does it mean to evaluate? To evaluate, we can look at the origin of that word, which is value. So whenever we talk about the value of something, we are actually looking at the merits of that particular thing. Is it right or is it wrong? Is it correct or is it incorrect? So in that instance, my general rule of thumb is provide us with the thing that you need to evaluate first. So if you're going to say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, that is the statement that you need to evaluate. You first of all either paraphrase it or you put it in direct quotations where you have copied and pasted it, and then you provide us with your evaluation. however that might unfold. We also have discursive essays where you need to discuss a particular idea. And the whole idea or notion of a discursive essay is you need to provide us both sides of the question. When God said, remember, that's usually a statement associated with our Seventh-day Adventist brethren whenever they are talking about is it the fourth commandment? Which one is it? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Which commandment is that? Commandment number what? It's number 4. All right. So when God said, remember, right, that can be the question. Evaluate or discuss the implications of the 4th commandment on why we go to church on Sunday. That can be a question, a rather difficult one, but nonetheless, it can be a question where we need to discuss. So we need to look at both sides of that equation. And in that instance, the way that we deal with the way that we present information. So you would have read something somewhere. Who's the popular writer, the lady, Ellen G. White, right? So for SDA people, Ellen G. White is the person, the go-to person. I'm not too sure, and I might be misrepresenting. I don't know if they consider her as a prophet, a prophetess.
Yes, she is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they consider.
Right. So now when you read her ideas about why we have to worship on the Sabbath, right? So you've read Ellen G. White, and probably you've also read Cornelius Van Til, or you've read Spurgeon, or you've read any number of these scholars. They will all have their own position. So the idea is, in a discursive essay, right, these scholars are saying we need to do this, or this particular person is saying we need to do this, right? Why is she saying that? You provide us with an explanation of your understanding of what she is saying, right? So she's saying we have to worship on the Sabbath because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But this other individual is actually saying those reasons are not justified enough because they haven't considered this other thing there. So what you're doing is you are discussing. It is that particular essay is a conversation between multiple voices. So that is what you do within a discursive essay. But don't worry about it now. This is literally because it's a question that has emerged. We are going to talk about essays in greater detail in the coming weeks. But here it's just to address how one might paraphrase within different kinds of essays. All right. So the moment we think of paraphrasing, we also need to initially understand the type of reading that we are doing. Is it purposive reading? With purposive reading, you open your textbook and you only want to look at maybe the chapter on research. So that is the only thing that we are going to focus on. We're going to focus on a specific chapter. So our focus is going to determine how we are going to be paraphrasing. Are we reading selectively? So we are not reading the whole chapter on on covenant theology, we are only going to focus on specific instances where they mention Trinity. So that is what selective reading is all about. We are now selecting from within the chapter. We are only going to read this specific portion. We will ignore the rest of the chapter. We are going to focus exclusively on this. But that thing there that says reading for understanding, the third point, reading for understanding actually becomes a base upon which we do our purposive and selective reading. Reading for understanding is perfect for paraphrasing precisely because the moment you read for understanding, you take in that information and, all right, I was going to write this word on the board. I'm not, I'm going to say it out because I can see that for the person that we have online, they won't be able to see. Scaffolding. So the word is scaffolding. A scaffold, most of us might know what this, in fact, all of us know what it is. We might just not know that that is what it is called. But whenever we are constructing a building or we are painting or we are plastering, we always see that metal structure that is put beside the wall. And we climb onto that and then we do whatever we are doing. So that is called a scaffold. Now, scaffolding as a concept in education implies the way we learn. So how we learn is we have all of this information that we have acquired either through reading or through experience. So in talking to people, in going about our daily lives, we are constantly picking up knowledge, picking up information. And what happens when we now study, we go and we read our books, we always take the new information that we have gotten from the book and we build it on top of prior learning. And we are ultimately creating a scaffold of knowledge. So when we talk about reading for understanding, what we are implying is you need to help, or not help, you need to make the new information you are reading make sense within the context of the old information that you have. Or at the very least, you need to find a common ground between the things that you already knew and the new information that you are getting. Literally because I'm not going to go there. Yeah, no. I don't want to chase you guys away because you see, this is my field now. So I might get a bit too enthusiastic, too excited, and now I'll start hitting you with words you've never heard of before. But the idea, so what I am teaching you now is the way that I study. And there is a section on note-taking, how we take down notes. And in these diaries of mine, I'm going to show you how I used scaffolding in order for me to learn. Because this diary here, 2007, contains in fact, these two, they contain all of my undergraduate study material. Because when it comes to writing down notes, it's not just something that I'm telling you that it's good for you to do, but it's something that I currently do right now. So you will open it and you'll see RDR, so these are now course codes, RDR 204, and it is literally filled with all the information for my first degree. All right, so I'm just going to send this around for you to look at the notes. So the reason why I want to show you these notes is, whenever I studied anything in one module, I would write it down. And when I was studying something for another module, I would write that down, but most importantly, I would try to understand how this module and that module are actually linked. Where exactly is the common ground? Because the idea is, as you are studying towards any given degree or certificate, the question that we are asking ourselves as the faculty is, we want these people to learn about theology. But theology is something that is way too big on its own for us to just say, this is it. So what we do is we break it down. So you need to understand that all of the modules that you are studying, they are actually broken down from a much bigger picture. And the importance of scaffolding is for you to then be able to draw connections between the things that you already know and the things that you are learning about now. So that is why scaffolding is necessary. And so when we read for understanding, scaffolding is what I would recommend, which is the reason why my personal philosophy, for those that might remember, I'm always telling you, whenever we are going to be looking at study skills or any other module that I'm going to teach you, you are not learning from scratch, but you are learning from experience. Because I'm always going to use the knowledge that you already have as a foundation upon which to install new information. So I genuinely believe that you don't know nothing. You do have knowledge. And I want you to use that knowledge as a basis, as a foundation, which is the reason why, even as we are talking about plagiarism and academic fraud, I'm giving examples of ownership of material things, because that is what we understand. If this thing is mine and someone comes in and takes it, they're stealing. That is a concept that we all know. And all I'm saying is, part of learning a new academic language is to equate what we already know to the things that we need to learn within study skills. So I use examples that are based on the things that we are familiar with, to show you that learning can be something that is absolutely brilliant. All right. And there's also reading for leisure. And when it is reading for leisure, I mean, we all know what that is. You're hardly there at times, or maybe you are so consumed by what the novel is saying, but you don't necessarily read in order for you to grasp that much, because when it's reading for leisure, it's just going just like that. So the type or style of reading is going to inform the practice within paraphrasing. And so the first instance there would have to be taking down notes. All right. So in terms of taking down notes, we have direct quotations, paraphrasing, or in-text referencing, recording details. So with recording details, this is where you're just jotting down facts, right? When you're looking at the history of the church, and, you know, for this particular assignment, we just need to know what exactly happened at the Council of Nicaea, right? You are just listing down, this is what it, so that is recording details. Then we have those writing memos. And part of what is actually in these diaries of mine are notes to myself. this is where I've read something and I think, wait, this is reminding me of something. I need to do this other thing. All right. So I write a memo to myself, right, to say, you know what? Whatever you do, remember this, come back to it. Or isn't this fascinating how it corresponds to that? I'm actually having a dialogue with myself about the things that I am learning. And that ultimately helps me to understand the information that I am learning about. And the very fact that I constantly reflect on this information and I don't just think about that information once and I'm done. The next time I'm reading any other book, I constantly remember the things that I dealt with in that other subject and that other subject and that other subject. It helps me because I'm constantly having an internal conversation with all of this information. So it helps me to even be able to summarize what I'm reading. Because in most of my summaries, when I summarize anything, there are basically two categories of information. One, what exactly is being said exclusively in this text? But most importantly, how does the contents of this text help me to better understand other things that are there? So when I put down my summaries, those are the things that I am actually thinking about. Because as I am studying all of these things, I'm not just studying this thing as completely isolated from everything else. And I also don't want you to feel as if, hey, but when we did biblical interpretation and now we are doing worldview, the things, they look the same. I don't want you to have that confusion. The very fact that you're seeing that these things are the same is a good thing. That's what we are looking for. Because when you are done, we don't want a person who has biblical interpretation is completely disconnected to worldview, is completely disconnected to the Old Testament, is completely disconnected to ethics. It's all the same thing. Because when you go out onto the pulpit, you don't say, I'm going to take out my ethics notes and only find stuff to preach on there. For you to give an expository sermon about a particular thing, you have to draw on all of those things at the same time. So that, for me, is the reason why scaffolding becomes very important, because it helps us to understand the connectedness of knowledge. And it is also a good thing because it helps us to utilize these study skills even when we go out there and we are just having a casual conversation. I'm going to give you guys a bit of an example. During the week, I was with Reverend Lewis, and I was telling him about, how I personally feel that I get the most learning, not from the event of opening a book and reading it, but I learn a lot from recognizing the implications of the small things in my day. And I gave him an example. We are expecting our second child right now, and she is going to be coming to us on the 5th of May. And I was telling Reverend Lewis that because she's the second born, I'm not worried at all. In fact, I haven't even started with the preparation. But with the first child, 2 months after we found out, we had everything. We were ready to go to the hospital. And the way I was so stressed, and I was saying to him, but I want you to recognize something, that nothing has changed about the physicality of what is happening to us. We were expecting then right? And we are expecting now. So if we were expecting then and we're expecting now, expecting is the same. But why am I less stressed now than I was the first time around? So the ability to reflect on these small instances that happen as we go about our lives is also something that we learn how to do by going through study skills. And so I was saying to him, my level of stress is therefore not based on the thing that I am going through. Because we went through pregnancy and expecting. We are going through pregnancy and expecting. It's the same thing. So why am I not worried now? It's because my thought process is relating to the thing that is happening. That is the thing that is most important, and not necessarily the thing itself. So the expecting happens either way, but my stress levels about it are now determined by how I tell myself about these things that are now happening. Yes.
Yes, in that note, is it not the natural power or the natural ability of an experience? It's not something that you have to push it or do it, but it's then it comes natural.
Right. So I like exactly how you are putting it. I'm going to correct it a little bit. I like that you're saying it's something that happens naturally. Yes and no. It is true that experiences happen to us naturally, but our ability to learn from them or to take out crucial information from them, that is not natural. That is the thing that we need to work at. That is where the skill comes through. But what you're saying is spot on, because ultimately, I want you to actually learn not just from your books, but from your day-to-day experiences. Your ability to just have a very casual conversation with someone, but be able to throw out strong implications, strong moral lessons. That is what is crucial. Because remember, when you ultimately go onto the pulpit, you are not exclusively going to be drawing information from what the textbooks were saying, but you have to be able to speak to people who have never read the textbook. So how then do you explain transubstantiation to a person who just grew up in Soweto? You need to be able to draw from their experiences and be able to see what from within their context can help you to get them to understand this concept. And that is a component of study skills, which emanates or which comes from one's ability to critically understand or to read and understand. Now, you referenced a particular idea and said, you know, what happens when you have this idea and it's similar or different or whatever to that other person's idea? I also have my own idea. I haven't yet written it down, and it might be similar to something that someone else has said. And this idea is life is a social text. What do we mean by social text? What I mean is the books that we read, they are a text that have an introduction, that have a plot, and that go on and on and on. The same thing happens with life. I see life as if it is a book that needs to be read for understanding. And our inability to read and understand life is going to be quite detrimental. But here's the other important thing. One thing that I hope and pray to God that you guys manage to understand is when we talk about reading for understanding, I want you to be able to read the social situation as if it was a textbook. And then to ask yourselves the critical questions. what are the implications of the things that I am seeing? What does it mean? So the moment you start to read life as if it is a text, you will then be able to apply to life some of the skills that we have learned from studying and reading books. And what that means is any book that we have read, while it is an authority in and of itself, but does not necessarily constitute the entire truth of things that we can know. So the same thing applies to our real life, because each and every person's life constitutes their own social text. So you are a textbook. You are a textbook. I am a textbook. We are all different textbooks. And our ability to see how the information in your textbook relates to the information in mine is what is going to help me be able to present certain information to the rest of the people. Yes.
I think what's interesting in what you're saying is that, therefore, why are we, if you're going to test us, because chances are study skills and we study true, not necessarily here, but maybe elsewhere. So we come here with a information study, yes, and we sit here and we then go through the methods in terms of studying, how do we study. Now, when you test us in exam or test or assignment, are you testing us in a manner that we should follow a certain ways of study? Or are we testing in terms of the principles of study so as to incorporate what we've already learned and obviously see the gaps and maybe improve? Or because then the questioning therefore would be, how is it going to be, how are the questions are going to be? Are we then going to be questioning in a sense that this is the only method that we're going to be using, or we could use that information by incorporating other information so that perhaps we, I don't know, improve on what we already have?
Right. So that is an excellent question. That unfortunately requires a very unfortunate answer. So the idea is the testing involved in study skills goes beyond the study skills module. So we are doing both of the things that you've spoken about. We are testing you on the principles. So within the context of study skills as a module in and of itself, we are going to be testing you on the principles. But not only are we testing you on the principles, but we are also pushing you to imagine a scenario where you could study in a better way. But the ultimate test for that is also seen in, in your performance of all the other modules that you are going to be doing. So in that regard, what is happening is everything that we are going to be teaching you about how to study in this module, you are going to have to apply to every module. But in terms of the principles, because we also want to understand if you have understood what it means to effectively study. So we might ask you, what does it mean to study effectively? You then have to list down the principles. So that is just for Walter to understand that you now know. But when it comes to the other sections, in terms of writing an assignment, yes, Walter is also going to give you example assignments that have been written well and assignments that have been written badly. And we are going to go through the process of understanding what makes this bad, what makes this good. And Walter is going to test you on whether you can write an assignment well. But beyond that, because Pastor Duni and Rev Lewis are always going to be saying, Walter, have you seen the assignments of your students? They've submitted this assignment to me and it is substandard. What went wrong? The implication being what we are learning in this module, you will have to apply in those other modules. So the testing of what you have learned in study skills goes beyond just what you're being taught by Walter in Walter's module. You will have to apply that when you are now submitting your first assignment for Christian character and for Bible interpretation, because what we will be looking at there is the presentation of the assignment. So how do you write the assignment? So with Walter, we are going to walk through what it means to write an assignment, how an assignment needs to look like, and what we have learned together, you are going to have to apply for that module for Bible interpretation. You are going to have to write an assignment. So what I am going to do for you guys, the moment you receive your assignment questions, right, for Bible interpretation as well as for Christian character, we are going to come to this class and we're going to look at those questions and we're going to ask ourselves, so what exactly does it mean? How are we supposed to write this thing? Because now you will be applying what you've been learning in study skills in those modules. Yes.
Just to help others. This is being say standard. They call it academic writing. Sometimes you can't see it now, and I've always told myself that but I need the time, but skill that. And it's so painful to prevent all the friends and experience and face what is not a fourth year standard. So I'm just trying to encourage some say the importance of this one. Some as you go up, theology becomes a presentation, not that you do not. Comes to present at mother of Jesus.
So true, which is exactly what we were talking about when I gave a brief overview of what this entire degree is actually all about. Because the idea is it's not so much Bible study that we're going to be doing, right? Where we have to ask you, so who is the mother of Jesus? But to study theology is to learn a new way of presenting what we know. And we are now learning of new ways of even thinking of those things, which is the reason why I'm assuming, but most of you guys, when you heard study skills, and then when you listen to what we were talking about today, it seems like it's a completely different thing, right? It's precisely because when we are within the space of theology, it is all to do with a particular way of approaching the information that we have always interacted with. We've always heard that, Jesus had brothers, but how do we approach asking the right kinds of questions? But how do we even know which question is right? What does right even mean? So that's where we are going. And it almost seems as if we are leaving the Bible there, but we are not. What theology is trying to do is to say, abandon all of your implied ways of understanding the Bible. Let us take a fresh look. How can we best understand or reconceptualize? See, those terms that I was telling you about, they are creeping in. How can we begin to reconceptualize our understanding of what the Bible is and its implications on our lives? And the hope is learning about this will also help you become better at presenting the knowledge of the Bible to other people out there. All right. So the last section is focusing on the library. And for this, we're just going to walk upstairs and I'll show you where the library is, and then we can call it a day. But before we go there, are there questions in terms of what we've been looking at here? Are we all good? All right. So guys, I also have another philosophy of mine that I follow religiously, and that is, because we are studying together, I leave no one behind. So we should all not leave anyone behind. If there is a person who feels like they don't quite understand, and if you feel you might be a little bit shy to ask out here, please, you can always come to me and say, yo, Walter, the way those other people were responding, it's like they know their things. And the question I have, I'm embarrassed to say it out loud. So you can come directly to me and we will try to iron everything out. But one thing that I don't want happening is for you to be lost and alone. So don't be shy. Please do come and we will have a conversation. We can always try and find better ways of putting things across. All right. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to share the slides with you guys. But for now, let us quickly go up to the library and check it out. And then we will call it a day.